The wedding music stopped. Not because the ceremony had ended, but because 6 police cruisers rolled onto the quiet neighborhood. Street with lights flashing. Guests froze. Children stopped dancing. The bride slowly lowered her bouquet as officers stepped out one by one. Then came the command, "Everyone stay where you are." A nervous silence spread across the crowd. Dozens of family members exchanged confused looks. What happened? Did someone get hurt?
Is there some kind of threat?
Across the street, a woman stood on her perfectly trimmed lawn with her arms folded and a satisfied smile. She had made the call herself. She'd told dispatch there was an out-of-control gathering bringing suspicious people into the neighborhood. She insisted the situation felt dangerous. Now she watched proudly as police surrounded the celebration. She expected arrests. She expected people to be escorted away. She expected to be thanked. Instead, the officers didn't rush toward the guests. They waited, every single one of them, as if they were expecting someone. The bride noticed it. First, she wasn't afraid anymore. She was smiling. The groom gently squeezed her hand. His expression never changed. No panic. No anger. Just quiet confidence. The woman across the street frowned. Why wasn't anyone reacting? Why weren't the officers taking control? Then a black SUV slowly turned onto the street. Every officer immediately straightened one by one. They raised their hands in salute. The guests began smiling. Some even laughed softly. The woman looked around in complete confusion. Who are they saluting? The SUV door opened. The groom calmly stepped away from the wedding aisle. He buttoned his suit jacket, walked directly toward the officers. And before anyone could understand what was happening, the senior officer smiled. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice echoed across the silent street. "Please welcome our chief." The neighbor's smile disappeared. Her face turned pale. Because the man she had tried to have removed from his own wedding was the highest-ranking police officer in the entire city. But what happened next was something no one, not the officers, not the guests, and certainly not the neighbor, would ever forget. The officers remained perfectly still. Not one of them reached for a handcuff. Not one of them barked another command. Instead, their attention stayed fixed on the man standing beside the bride. Marcus Ellison adjusted the cuff of his navy suit with the same calm precision he used every morning before work. His heartbeat never seemed to change, even as whispers spread through the wedding guests. What is happening? Do they know him? Why aren't they doing anything? Across the street, Linda Parker's confident smile began to fade. This wasn't how she had imagined the scene unfolding. She had expected officers to break up the celebration immediately. Instead, they looked as though they were waiting for permission to move. A young patrol officer shifted nervously and glanced toward his sergeant. "Should we?" he whispered. The sergeant gave the slightest shake of his head. "We wait." The silence became almost unbearable. Children clung to their parents. Elderly relatives held their breath. Even the wedding photographer slowly lowered his camera, unsure whether he was witnessing the end of a celebration or the beginning of something much bigger. Marcus leaned toward Ava. "I'm sorry this interrupted our day." She smiled softly, never letting go of his hand. "You've taught me something since the day we met," she whispered. "Stay calm until the whole story is visible." He smiled back. "You always remember." The distant hum of another engine drifted down the street. Heads turned. A sleek black SUV rolled around the corner at a steady pace before stopping beside the patrol cars. The moment its tires came to a halt, every officer instinctively straightened. Doors opened. No one spoke. The neighborhood seemed to hold its breath. Linda frowned harder. "What are they waiting for?" she muttered under her breath. The SUV's driver stepped out first, followed by an older uniformed commander with silver hair. He surveyed the scene for only a second before walking directly toward Marcus. Then, without hesitation, he raised a crisp salute. "So sorry for the interruption, Chief," he said loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Our officers responded exactly as they were supposed to. Every patrol officer immediately followed with a salute of their own. Gasps rippled through the wedding guests. Some covered their mouths. Others stared at Marcus in complete disbelief. Linda's face drained of color. Her eyes darted from one officer to another, searching for some sign that this had to be a misunderstanding. But there wasn't. One, the man she had reported as suspicious wasn't simply attending the wedding, he was the leader of every officer standing in front of her. And for the first time that afternoon, Linda realized she wasn't watching strangers being investigated. She was watching her own assumptions collapse in front of the entire neighborhood. Heavy silence settled over the street. The only sound was the soft rustle of leaves in the afternoon breeze and the distant melody from the string quartet, which had stopped playing moments earlier. Every eye remained fixed on Marcus. He lowered the commander's salute with a gentle nod. "Thank you, Commander," he said evenly. "Your team answered a citizen's call." That's exactly what they're sworn to do. The officers relaxed slightly, but none of them moved until Marcus gave another small nod. It was a quiet display of respect that spoke louder than any announcement could have. The wedding guests exchanged astonished glances. "You never told us," Marcus's cousin whispered. Marcus offered a modest smile. "Today wasn't supposed to be about my job." Ava looked at him with admiration. She had always loved that about him. Whether he wore a tailored suit or a police uniform, he never sought attention. To him, titles belonged at work. Family belonged here. Across the street, Linda stood frozen. Just minutes earlier, she had been certain she was protecting the neighborhood. She had watched unfamiliar faces arriving, heard laughter spilling into the street, and convinced herself that something didn't belong. Without asking a single question, she had picked up the phone. Now every confident thought she had clung to was slipping away. Several neighbors had quietly gathered on their front lawns after hearing the sirens. Mrs. Hernandez, who lived 2 houses away, glanced at Linda. "Did you call them?" Linda hesitated. I thought something wasn't right." Mrs. Hernandez looked across at the smiling families filling the decorated yard. "They're having a wedding." "I didn't know." "You didn't try to know." Those words landed harder than Linda expected. Meanwhile, Marcus walked toward the line of officers. "I appreciate your professionalism," he said. "No one here blames you for doing your duty." The youngest officer looked visibly relieved. "Chief Dispatch reported a possible disturbance. We had no idea this was your ceremony." Marcus nodded. "And if it had been someone else's wedding, you still should have come." Every call deserves the same response. The officers exchanged respectful smiles. It was exactly the kind of leadership they had come to expect from him. The commander turned toward the gathered guests. "My apologies for the interruption, everyone. We won't keep your celebration any longer." As the officers began returning to their vehicles, Linda noticed something that unsettled her even more than the salutes. No one was angry with the police. No one shouted. No one demanded explanations. Instead, guests thanked the officers for their service, and several officers warmly congratulated the bride and groom before leaving. Watching kindness replace confrontation made Linda feel more uncomfortable than any argument ever could, because it left her alone with one question she could no longer avoid. What if the real disturbance had never been the wedding at all? As the last patrol car pulled away, the flashing lights disappeared from the quiet street, leaving behind an almost unreal calm. One by one, conversations slowly returned, though they carried a different tone now. The laughter was softer, mixed with relief and disbelief. Marcus stepped back toward the flower-covered arch where the ceremony had been interrupted. "I'm afraid we've delayed the schedule," he said with a warm smile. The guests chuckled, grateful for the chance to breathe again. The officiant adjusted his glasses and laughed. "Well, in 30 years of performing weddings, I've never had to pause because the groom's employees arrived." The crowd erupted into genuine laughter. Even Ava couldn't help, smiling. "I guess that's one way to make an entrance," she teased. Marcus shrugged playfully. "Not exactly the entrance I had planned." The tension that had gripped everyone moments earlier finally melted away. Across the street, however, Linda hadn't moved. She remained standing beside her mailbox, watching every smile, every embrace, every joyful moment that continued as if nothing had happened. She expected someone to glare at her. She expected Marcus to confront her. She expected at least one angry family member to cross the street and demand an explanation. But no one did. That silence was becoming unbearable. As the officiant Resumed the ceremony. Marcus gently took Ava's hands again. "My love," he began, his voice steady. "I promised you that no matter what life placed in our path, I would meet it with honesty, patience, and courage." Ava smiled through tears. "And I promised to remind you that even the strongest people deserve peace." Several guests quietly wiped away tears. Linda listened from across the street without meaning to. Every word carried across the calm afternoon air, looked at the people gathered beneath the white tents. Grandparents held hands. Children sat cross-legged on the grass, smiling as they watched. Friends from every background stood shoulder to shoulder, celebrating two people they clearly loved. It looked nothing like the frightening picture she had imagined when she made the call. A man standing near the sidewalk noticed Linda lingering. He walked across the street carrying a small paper plate. She instinctively tensed. Instead of confronting her, he simply smiled. "You've been standing out here a while." She nodded awkwardly. He held out the plate. "We've got plenty of food. You're welcome to join us." Linda stared at him, unable to answer. "You know who I am?" He nodded. "I do." "And you're still inviting me?" He smiled again. "It's a wedding. Nobody should have to watch one alone." For a moment, Linda couldn't find a single word. The invitation felt heavier than any accusation could have, because forgiveness offered so freely forced her to face something she had spent years avoiding. The people she had feared without knowing were showing her more grace than she had shown them in return. Linda looked down at the paper plate in the man's hands. Fresh fruit, slices of cake, and a small sandwich rested neatly on it. It was such an ordinary gesture, yet it felt impossible to accept. "I don't think I should," she said quietly. The man smiled without judgment. "My name's Daniel. I'm Marcus's younger brother." Her eyes widened. "You know I called the police?" "I do. And you're not angry?" Daniel glanced toward the wedding, where Marcus and Ava were exchanging vows beneath the white arch. "I'd rather my brother remember today for his marriage than for another argument." He gently placed the plate on the top of her mailbox. "If you change your mind, there's a seat waiting." With that, he walked back across the street. Linda stood motionless, staring at the untouched food. No insults, no sarcasm, no public humiliation, only kindness. It made her chest feel strangely heavy. Back beneath the arch, the ceremony continued. "I now invite the couple to exchange their rings," the officiant announced. Marcus slipped a simple gold band onto Ava's finger. "This ring is a promise," he said. "Not only to love you when life is easy, but to stand beside you when life becomes difficult." Ava smiled as she placed his ring on his hand. "And I promise to remind you that compassion is never weakness. It's the strongest choice we can make." The Tao guests applauded softly. Several officers who had remained nearby to ensure traffic flowed smoothly couldn't help but smile. One rookie officer leaned toward his partner. "I've only worked under the chief for 6 months." His partner nodded. "He handles every situation exactly like this." "What do you mean?" "He never asks first who deserves respect. He starts by giving it." The younger officer looked toward Marcus with renewed admiration. "I've heard stories about him." "They're all true," the veteran replied. 22 years on the force, countless dangerous cases, and I've never seen him lose control of his temper. Meanwhile, Linda's eyes followed Marcus as he laughed with his guests after the vows were complete. She had expected someone with that much authority to be intimidating. Instead, he spent nearly every minute greeting elderly relatives, hugging old friends, kneeling to speak with children at eye level, and thanking the catering staff. Personally, nothing about him matched the picture she had created in her mind. Mrs. Hernandez quietly stepped beside Linda. "I met Marcus 3 years ago," she said. Linda remained silent. "He helped my grandson after a terrible accident." She smiled at the memory. "He visited him every week in the hospital." Linda slowly turned. "I've lived across from him for months." Mrs. Hernandez nodded gently. "And yet today is the first time you've really seen him." Those words settled deep inside Linda, harder to ignore than any siren that had echoed through the neighborhood that afternoon. The reception began just as the sun dipped lower, bathing the neighborhood in a warm golden light. White light strung between the trees flickered to life and soft music drifted through the air. The earlier tension had faded for everyone except Linda. She remained on her porch, unable to convince herself to go inside. From where she stood, she could see children chasing bubbles across the lawn while grandparents clapped along to the music. Neighbors who had never spoken more than a quick greeting were now laughing together over shared tables. It looked less like a private wedding and more like the kind of community gathering people remembered for years. Linda's phone buzzed in her hand. It was a message from Karen, another member of the neighborhood association. Did the police ever remove those people? Linda stared at the screen. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard before she finally typed a reply. No. I was mistaken. She read the words 3 times before pressing send. Almost immediately, Karen responded, "What do you mean you were mistaken?" Linda locked her phone without answering. For the first time in a long while, she didn't have an explanation that made her feel certain. Across the street, Marcus noticed an elderly guest struggling to carry 2 folding chairs. Before anyone else could react, he crossed the lawn and lifted both chairs himself. "Please," the woman protested with a laugh. "It's your wedding." "And you're still my aunt," Marcus replied. "That job doesn't take a day off." The guests around them laughed warmly. Ava watched from a distance, shaking her head with an affectionate smile. "He's incapable of sitting still," she joked to Daniel. Daniel grinned. "He's been like that since we were kids." A few moments later, Marcus spotted one of the catering servers trying to clean a table alone after a tray had tipped over. Without hesitation, he picked up a stack of napkins and knelt beside her. "Don't worry," he said. "We'll have this cleaned up in a minute." The young server looked embarrassed. "I'm so sorry." "Sir?" Marcus smiled. "Today's too happy for apologies." Linda watched every moment. She had spent months assuming Marcus believed he was better than everyone else because of the nice home, the steady stream of visitors, and the quiet respect people seemed to show him. Now she realized she had mistaken respect for arrogance. People weren't polite because they feared him. They were kind because he had been kind to them first. As the music grew louder, Daniel glanced across the street and noticed Linda still standing alone. He walked over once more, this time carrying 2 glasses of lemonade. Holding one out to her, he said with an easy smile, "The invitation still stands." Linda looked from the glass in his hand to the joyful celebration across the street. For the first time all day, she took a hesitant step off her porch. Linda accepted the glass with trembling hands. "Thank you," she said so quietly that Daniel almost didn't hear her. "You're welcome." For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. They simply watched the celebration together. Laughter floated through the evening air, and the band began playing a slow, familiar tune as couples gathered on the small dance floor. "I don't know if I belong over there," Linda admitted. Daniel took a sip of his lemonade before answering. "Everyone starts as a stranger." She looked at him with uncertainty. "Even after what I did?" He smiled gently. "My brother has spent his entire career believing people should be judged by what they choose to do next, not only by what they've done before." Those words settled into her heart. Across the yard, Marcus had just finished dancing with Ava when he noticed Daniel speaking with Linda. Their eyes met for a brief moment. Daniel gave a subtle nod, as if asking a silent question. Marcus answered with a small smile. That was all the permission Daniel needed. "Come on," he said. Linda froze. "I can't." "You can." "They'll all stare at me. They're too busy." Celebrating, she hesitated, then slowly walked beside him across the street. The closer they came, the louder the music sounded. Linda felt every step growing heavier. Conversations continued around her. Children ran past without paying her any attention. Guests laughed over shared stories, completely unaware of the storm raging inside her. Marcus walked toward her before she could lose her nerve. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "I owe you an apology," Linda finally said, lowering her eyes. "I made assumptions about your family, about your guests, and I never gave any of you the chance to prove me wrong." Marcus remained silent, allowing her to finish. "I saw people I didn't recognize," she continued. "Instead of introducing myself, I assumed the worst. I embarrassed your family on one of the most important days of your life." Her voice cracked. I'm deeply sorry. The nearby conversation softened as a few guests noticed what was happening, but no one interrupted. Marcus looked at Linda for a long moment before extending his hand. It takes courage to admit when we're wrong. She looked at his outstretched hand in surprise. I don't deserve your kindness, Marcus. Shook his head. Kindness isn't something people earn only after they make perfect decisions slowly. Linda placed her hand in his. Forgive you. Tears filled her eyes instantly. I don't know how to repay that. Marcus glanced around at the families enjoying the evening. Start by getting to know your neighbors, Ava. Stepped beside him and smiled warmly. And before the cake disappears, she added with a laugh. You should probably have a slice. A ripple of laughter spread through the guests, breaking the last of the tension. For the first time that day, Linda laughed too, and it felt like the beginning of someone she had almost forgotten she could become. The laughter lingered long after the moment had passed. Someone handed Linda a small plate of chocolate cake, while another guest offered her a chair near one of the round tables. She accepted both with quiet gratitude, still expecting the warmth around her to disappear at any moment. It never did. Instead, people introduced themselves. A retired school teacher told her how Marcus had organized a scholarship fund for students who couldn't afford college applications. A firefighter shared the story of a winter storm when Marcus spent an entire night helping stranded families before going home to sleep. One of Ava's former students, now a young nurse, smiled proudly. She believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. Linda listened more than she spoke. With every story, another piece of the image she had built over the past year crumbled away. She realized she had lived directly across the street from people whose lives had quietly touched hundreds of others, yet she had never bothered to knock on their door. As the evening continued, the band paused for a short break. Daniel gently tapped his glass with a spoon. If I could have everyone's attention for just a minute. The conversations faded into silence. Daniel looked toward Marcus and Ava before smiling at the crowd. Most of you know my brother is Chief Ellison. Several officers nodded proudly. But before he was chief, he was just Marcus, the kid who believed every broken bicycle could be repaired and every lonely person deserved company. Soft laughter spread through the guests. Daniel continued. Our parents taught us that the easiest thing in the world is to judge someone from a distance. The hardest thing is to walk across the street, introduce yourself, and discover you were wrong. His eyes briefly met Linda's. He never said her name. He didn't need to. The beautiful thing about today isn't that Marcus married the love of his life. He smiled at Ava. It's that this wedding reminds us every neighborhood becomes stronger when fear is replaced by conversation. The guests applauded. Marcus stepped forward, clearly embarrassed by the attention. You know I don't like speeches, he joked. More laughter followed. But my brother left me little choice. He looked around at the faces surrounding him. My badge has opened many doors in my career. Then he rested his hand over his wedding ring. But this, he glanced lovingly at Ava, this reminds me that the greatest title I'll ever have is husband. Ava squeezed his hand as the crowd cheered. Marcus's smile softened. If today's interruption taught us anything, it's that every person deserves the chance to be known before they're judged. His words hung gently in the evening air. Linda lowered her eyes, not out of shame this time, but out of understanding. She had spent years believing safety came from keeping people at a distance. Now she was beginning to see that trust was built in exactly the opposite way. As the applause faded, the band struck up another song, and the dance floor quickly filled again. Children twirled beneath the string lights while grandparents clapped from their seats, smiling at the joy around them. Linda remained at her table, quietly taking everything in. She noticed something she had overlooked before. Marcus never stayed in one place for long. He danced with Ava for a moment, then stepped away to greet an elderly neighbor. He helped a little boy tie his untied shoelace, carried extra blankets to guests as the evening breeze turned cool, and thanked every member of the catering team by name before they packed up another tray. No task seemed beneath him. No person seemed invisible. It was a kind of leadership Linda had never considered. Not loud, not demanding, simply present. A little girl wandered over to Marcus, holding a wilted flower she had picked up from the ground. "I broke it," she said with a worried frown. Marcus knelt until he was eye level with her. "You didn't break it," she looked confused. "The wind bent it," he continued. "Sometimes beautiful things just need a little care." He tucked the flower back into her tiny bouquet. "There. Good. As new." The little girl beamed before running back to her parents. Linda felt a lump rise in her throat. She thought about all the times she had judged people. After seeing only one moment, one appearance, one assumption, how many lives had she misunderstood because she had never taken the time to learn the rest of the story? As the evening drew to a close, guests began folding chairs and collecting decorations. Without being asked, Linda stood up. "What can I help with?" she asked. Ava looked pleasantly surprised. "You don't have to." "I know," Linda replied. "I'd like to." Within minutes, she was stacking empty plates, gathering ribbons, and carrying centerpieces to a nearby table. No one treated her like an outsider. No one reminded her of the phone call. They simply worked beside her. At one point, Marcus walked over carrying a box of decorations. He smiled. "I appreciate you staying." Linda shook her head. "No, thank you for letting me." Marcus placed the box down. "My father used to tell me that neighbors aren't chosen." She listened. "Carefully, but community is." Linda nodded. "Slowly, I spent so much time protecting my neighborhood that I forgot to become part of it." Marcus's expression softened. "It's never too late." She looked around at the families laughing together as they cleaned up after the celebration. For the first time in years, the houses on the street no longer looked like separate properties divided by fences and sidewalks. They looked like homes connected by something much stronger. And Linda quietly promised herself that the next time someone new arrived in the neighborhood, she wouldn't reach for her phone. She would walk across the street and introduce herself first. The wedding became the talk of the neighborhood, but not for the reason anyone had expected. People didn't remember the flashing police lights. They remembered the forgiveness. Over the following weeks, neighbors who had barely exchanged a wave began stopping to talk on their evening walks. Children rode their bicycles from one end of the street to the other, without parents worrying about which yard they had wandered into. Something had shifted, quietly but unmistakably. Linda noticed it too. For years she had believed she knew everyone worth knowing on the block. Now she realized she had known addresses more than people. One Saturday morning, she stood outside her house holding a tray of homemade muffins. She stared across the street at Marcus and Ava's home, taking a deep breath before walking over. Before she could knock, the front door opened. Ava smiled warmly. "Good morning." Linda blinked in surprise. "You knew I was here?" Ava laughed softly. "I saw you through the window." Linda looked down at the tray. "I made these. I'm not much of a baker, but I wanted to bring something." Ava accepted the tray with genuine appreciation. "They smell wonderful." Marcus appeared from the hallway carrying a box of gardening tools. "We were just heading outside to plant flowers," he said. Linda hesitated. "Would you mind if I helped?" Marcus smiled. "We'd be glad to have you." The three of them spent the morning digging small holes along the front walkway. They planted colorful flowers side by side, talking about everything from favorite books to childhood memories. For the first time, Linda learned that Marcus had grown up only a few miles away, raised by parents who taught him that respect wasn't measured by rank but by, how you treated people who could do nothing for you. She learned that Ava had once dreamed of becoming a teacher before, dedicating her life to mentoring young people. After school instead, they learned things about Linda too, that she had lost her husband several years earlier, that loneliness had slowly turned into suspicion, that watching the neighborhood change without feeling connected had made her retreat behind routines and assumptions. No one interrupted her, no one judged her. Marcus simply listened. When she finished, he nodded thoughtfully. "Pain has a way of building walls." Linda looked away. "I didn't even realize I was hiding behind them." Marcus picked up a small flowering plant and handed it to her. "Then let's make today the day you start replacing those walls with gardens." Linda smiled through tears as she carefully lowered the plant. Into the fresh soil, it wasn't just another flower taking root. It was the beginning of a friendship that none of them could have imagined on the day sirens echoed through their quiet street. By the time spring returned the following year, the neighborhood looked different. The flowers planted along Marcus and Ava's walkway had grown into bright rows of color, spilling over the edges of the garden beds. But the biggest change wasn't in the landscaping, it was in the people. Neighbors who had once hurried from their cars to their front doors now lingered outside to chat. Weekend cookouts became common, children played together until sunset, and birthdays were celebrated with the entire street invited instead of just a handful of families. At the center of it all was a tradition no one had planned. Every first Saturday of the month, someone hosted a community gathering. The idea had started with Marcus and Ava, but it quickly became everyone's event. One afternoon, as tables filled with homemade dishes lined the sidewalk, Linda stood beside a welcome sign she had painted herself. It read, "Neighbors first, assumptions last, families." Smiled as they walked past it. Children stopped to read it. Aloud, Marcus noticed the sign and chuckled. "I think you've become our unofficial committee chair." Linda laughed. "I retired from telling people what to do. So what do you do now?" Ava asked. Linda looked around at the smiling faces. "I make sure everyone feels invited." Those simple words carried more meaning than anyone there realized. Later that afternoon, a moving truck pulled into the empty house at the end of the street. A young family stepped out, looking uncertain as strangers often do in a new neighborhood. Before they had unloaded their first box, Linda picked up a plate of cookies and started walking toward them. Marcus watched from across the street with a quiet smile. Daniel nudged him playfully. "Looks familiar." Marcus nodded. "It does." The young couple looked surprised as Linda introduced herself. "Welcome," she said warmly. "If you need anything at all, every house on this street is happy to help." Within minutes, several neighbors joined her. Some carried bottled water. Others offered moving boxes, tools, and extra hands. The family smiled with visible relief. Watching it unfold, Marcus slipped his hand into Ava's. She leaned her head gently against his shoulder. "Do you ever think about our wedding day?" she asked. "Every time I hear laughter on this street," she smiled. "Funny, isn't it?" "What is?" "The day that almost divided everyone ended up bringing everyone together." Marcus looked toward Linda, who was laughing with the new neighbors as children chased each other through the yard. "People can surprise you," he said quietly, "not because they never make mistakes, but because they're capable of growing beyond them." As the sun dipped below the rooftops, the neighborhood echoed with conversation, music, and laughter. The memory of sirens had long faded. What remained was something far more powerful, a community built not on fear or first impressions, but on grace, understanding, and the simple courage to cross the street before passing judgment. And that became the story everyone remembered. Not the call to the police, but the day compassion answered first.